Hello and welcome to another motorcycle video. In this one I'm going to talk about electric cars again, and I'm going to talk about an article I read in Drive about quality controls and reliability with electric cars. So I feel a few disclaimers first of all. Number one is that I don't own an electric car. I don't have any financial interest in any company that makes electric cars. I'm not trying to sell you one. I'm not endorsing a brand or a model or anything like that. I'm just talking about it based on an article I read in Drive. I also don't know the journalist who wrote this article. Her name is Susanna Guthrie and she works for Drive as a journalist. And so my comments are more directed toward the content of the article and not necessarily meant to be any criticism of her personally or her ethics or her journalistic capabilities, just my commentary on the article. Now, for context, Drive is the motoring section of the Channel 9 newspapers, so that's for people who live in Australia. If you don't live in Australia, the newspapers used to be owned by the Fairfax family, and now they're owned by Channel 9, and those newspapers are mainly the Sydney Morning Herald and the Melbourne Age, and there may be a few smaller regional newspapers. I subscribe to the Sydney Morning Herald, so that's how I know about Drive's content. They also have their own YouTube channel, and they also feature on one of the Channel 9 digital channels with some of their content, reviews and other motoring matters. I have watched a number of their YouTube reviews of various cars, and I came across this article which was dated the 7th of July 2004 at 1600, that is 4 p.m, and the headline was, "Are Chinese electric cars reliable?" The headline, was, "Are Chinese electric cars reliable? Here's what the data says," and it was written by Susanna Guthrie. The article states that in 2023, China became the third largest source of new vehicles for Australia, behind Japan and Thailand. Now, in the case of Thailand, there are no Thai brand of cars sold in Australia, but there are manufacturers who make cars, who have factories in Thailand, whose product is exported to Australia. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you what brands or models they are, but it's not like MG or something like that. There's not a Thai brand of car, but there are cars by what are now referred to, I think, kindly as legacy auto manufacturers who make cars and have factories in Thailand, and their cars are exported to Australia. It also stated that the sales of cars from China were up by 57.5% on the figure for 2022. So Chinese vehicles are selling well, or there's been a huge increase, maybe from a small base, but I understand, for example, that MG has sold something like 14,000 cars in Australia in 2023 and are well past that target already in the first half of 2024. The article then goes on to reasonably state that people have inquired about the reliability of Chinese cars, and it acknowledges, of course, that reliability can vary from brand to brand and from model to model within a particular brand, and it's influenced by the driver's habits and maintenance habits and how well they look after their car and how frequently they have it serviced and those sort of things. Of course, the servicing schedules for electric cars are different from the servicing schedules for combustion vehicles, and in some cases it's a case of when it's needed, the car will tell you when it's needed, and I believe that's the case with Tesla. With others it's a case of, once a year or every 20,000 kilometres or something like that. In the case of electric vehicles, of course, there are very much less moving parts, so there's much less to be serviced. Now, in 2024, there was a survey by a company called JD Power, and the survey was China's New Energy Vehicles Initial Quality Study, and it studied electric vehicles from China and plug-in hybrid vehicles from China. And the study said that quality problems had increased had increased since 2023, with some exceptions. JD Power is an analytics firm. They analyse all sorts of things, but one of the things that they do is analyse the number of faults per 100 vehicles that are reported for all vehicle manufacturers, and rank vehicles according to the most complained about to the least complained about. I think it'd be reasonable to assume if you spent $100,000 on a car and it had even a minor complaint, you would tend to complain about it you're more likely to complain about it and expect something to be done about it than if you'd spent $20,000 on a car. But what they do is they work out a formula that tells them how many complaints there are per 100 vehicles, and on that basis they then rank the cars according to from least reliable to most reliable. And so in 2024 they surveyed 10,000 EV and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, that's plug-in battery hybrid electric vehicles, across 81 cities in China. So I think you'd agree that's a reasonable survey. 10,000 owners, 81 cities. So they didn't just ask all the people in Beijing or Shanghai or somewhere like that, they asked across a range of cities. And the survey revealed that there were, as an average, 210 problems reported per 100 cars. That was an increase of 37 problems over 2023. So in 2023 the number of problems was 210 minus 37, which is, you do the maths on that, 277, something like that, 287, and that reliability problems had gone up by 37 per 100 cars over 2023. Now at this point it's important to note a couple of things about this survey. First of all, many of the cars that they reported on are not available in Australia. So the survey is not a lot of use to us because the cars, you just can't buy them in Australia, so there's nothing to compare that car with. The second thing is that there is a distinction between cars that are Chinese brands, such as BYD, MG, Aura, GWM and so on, and other companies such as Tesla and BMW that make cars in China but are not Chinese companies, if you understand what I mean. So there are car companies that are Chinese in their origins, like the ones I quoted, and then there are other car manufacturers who are European or American manufacturers who make cars in China, or even Korean companies, for example Kia, who make cars in China but they're not Chinese companies. The JD Power survey said that there were issues, some of the issues were related to design problems in the cars. For example, tyre noise was a problem that was considered serious enough to be reportable as a fault or as a problem, rather than functional problems such as the windscreen wipers don't work or something like that. And so JD Power says that car makers operating out of China must prioritise user experience and perceived quality. In other words, if they want to sell cars, they have to make sure that the user, the driver, the potential buyer, has a good experience when they get in the car. It feels like it's a quality car. It looks like it looks like a quality car. It feels like a quality car, so that it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and so on. It must be a duck. Same with a quality car. A common complaint that was made about all the cars in the survey was that driver assistance systems were too loud, too intrusive and poorly calibrated. And in my experience of watching lots and lots of reviews from Drive, from CarSource, The Right Car, Cars.com and so on, every single reviewer of every single vehicle these days complains about those things. And there are many reviewers and commenters who say, well, can't you just turn those things off and turn them off permanently? Now, digressing for a moment, in order for vehicles to get a 5-star ANCAP rating, they are required to have an active suite of ADAS, things like lane keeper assist, rear passenger alert, and so on and so forth, and they are required to be active by default, so that every time you turn the car on, those systems are activated. If they could be permanently deactivated, there would be no point in fitting them in the car in the first place, And so the 5-star ANCAP rating, which is so important in terms of safety for families, would not be obtainable. Another complaint was about poor infotainment systems. That is, they often were unresponsive, or their response was slow or laggy, as they call it. And they also complained sometimes that the navigation systems, which were provided as part of the infotainment screen, were not very good in comparison with, say, the navigation system that you might use on your phone, be it Google Maps or something else. Now, I have talked about some of these issues to do with infotainment screens in previous videos, but it is my general view that most of the features that are operated through the infotainment screen should either be turned off before the vehicle starts, or can only be turned off once the vehicle with the vehicle stopped. In other words, you should not be able to turn off any of the ADAS stuff while the vehicle is moving, and things like adjusting the temperature and the fan speed and so on. They either can be done by voice control, or they can be done by sliders on the screen, or in many cases now there are buttons that are available as well. According to the JD Power survey, 2 persistent problems over the last 6 years were an unpleasant interior smell and road noise. Now, I don't know what it is that you do about unpleasant roads, interior smell, because I don't know what the smell inside of these vehicles is, whether it's Chinese noodles or it smells like some Chinese food that people don't like. And road noise, I guess that is to do with insulation, and also to do with the suspension and the tyres. But if we keep in mind as a factor that every car, no matter what its price and what it is built to a budget. It's only a question of what is the budget, and some of these Chinese electric cars are built to be affordable, and therefore I guess there is some skimping on insulation and so on that might otherwise cut out some of the road noise, harshness and vibration that people are complaining about. Now, one of the things, this is where the report gets interesting though, because the distinction that I mentioned earlier, that is the second distinction that I mentioned about cars made by Chinese companies and cars made in China, it appears that the international brands Tesla, and in particular the Model Y, and the Model Y that's sold in Australia is in fact made in China, and the BMW iX3 have the highest number of complaints at 218 complaints per 100 cars, and that's an increase of 54 per 100 over 2023. So in the question of are Chinese cars reliable, the question might be, well, are cars made by Chinese companies more reliable than cars made by other companies in China? And on the basis of that report, it would seem fair to say the answer is yes. Now, as I said at the beginning of this broadcast, I'm not here to sell you a car, endorse a particular model, but there is a lot of folklore and a lot of talk you see on YouTube and various internet forums that say Chinese cars are rubbish and you should never buy one. I'm not saying they are or they aren't. I'm saying that JD Power are saying that in fact some of the European and American manufacturers who make cars in China, their quality control, their reliability is worse than the Chinese brands. The report also notes that the quality of Chinese-made range extended vehicles, in other words, the long-range version of most vehicles, is exceptional and is an industry leading. In fact, range extended car faults has 8 per 100 complaints lower than the average. So if the average is 210 per 100, 210 complaints per 100 cars, or 2.1 complaints per car, then for the long-range version of electric vehicles that are made by Chinese companies, the average is 8 per 100 lower, so that'd be 202 complaints per 100 cars. Now, this is where another point where the matter gets interesting, because this is a report, as I said, in the Sydney Morning Herald, and a newspaper that's published in Sydney and covers New South Wales, and of the vehicles that it listed here, many are not in fact sold in Australia. So the heading was the headline was the most reliable Chinese EVs, and they listed them in order from most reliable to least reliable. Geely Panda Mini, not sold in Australia. Geometry A Pro, also not sold here. Aeon V Plus and BYD Yuan Plus. Aeon is not sold in Australia. The BYD Yuan Plus is sold here as the Atto 3. So out of those top 3 cars, the only one that's actually sold in Australia is the Atto 3. The rest of the list includes a Neo ETS/ET5T, not sold in Australia. The Audi Q4 e-tron, it's due to be here in late 2024. The Zeekr 001, not sold in Australia. The N10 ESB, not sold in Australia. The BYD Seal, full EV sold in Australia, but the plug-in hybrid battery version is not sold here. And the Way Lancia DHT, also not sold in Australia. So in terms of being useful information for potential buyers of Chinese made or Chinese brand electric vehicles, this article was not very helpful, because out of the 9 brands that I've just listed, only one is in fact available in the Australian market. Now, some of those others brands have said they have plans to release vehicles for the Australian market, or maybe are coming to the market in 2025, but they're not here at the moment. So what conclusions can we draw from this article? Well, according to JD Power, some Chinese makers have their act together, although there was no mention of MG or Aura, and both of those vehicles are sold in Australia, and MG have a proliferation of models, both electric, plug-in hybrid and combustion engines, and the Aura, which is a sub-brand of GWM, is only sold here as an electric vehicle. But international brands that make cars in China, like the ones I mentioned, seem to be doing less well, or not as good as, the Chinese makers themselves. Another conclusion we could draw is that maybe if these cars are, and especially the long-range versions that JD Power say are exceptional and industry-leading, if they are as good as they say they are, maybe more effort should be made to encourage more of those brands to be made available to the Australian consumer, so that there is a greater choice in our options for buying a fully electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, and so that if we are to get on track to reducing our carbon emissions and meeting the new vehicle industry emission standards and so on, the greater the range of electric vehicles that are available, the more likely we are to reach the standard. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you found my commentary interesting. If not, that you've enjoyed the scenery while I've been riding around. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to your company in the next video that I make.